Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guests today are Matt Mandrock. He's the head of U.S. Public Sector at Zoom, and Stephen Ellis is the Government Solutions Lead at Zoom. Good to have you both with us. And let's get right to it. The Zoom is in the business of people interacting, and now we have an executive order from the Biden White House, the Biden administration on customer experience, and that extends to both how the government deals with other government agencies, but even more importantly, how it deals with the public in an equitable manner and in a contemporary manner. So what do you both think this means in terms of how citizens should interact with government under this new CX, this imperative to bring better customer experience, better service, really, from agencies to the public?
Tom, thanks for having us today. I really appreciate it. As consumers, we've developed this affinity for those incredible customer experiences. And when we take our sort of our government hats off, right, we remember those businesses or services that we've obtained in a fast and accurate way, where maybe an adjudication process is transparent. So whether we're buying something online or going to one of the companies that we do business with, we certainly recognize those best of breed experiences. And not to say that consumer experiences are always across the board ideal, but certainly we recognize those times when they are fast and accurate and transparent. And so I think the motion, if you will, within government is to bring that same level of transparency of fast and accurate results that we have as a consumer, and bring that into that government experience when we're obtaining benefits for services and programs. And Tom, I think one of the real challenges here are that people frequently are trying to obtain those government services in a critical moment in their life. So a wounded veteran is now trying to get back on track after debilitating injury, and is now interacting with government in some way. Can those services, whether it's online or however digital or video or however they're interacting with government, can those services really meet them in their moment of crisis, or other social services or other benefit applications that people might have? But also in the regular course of work, can our farmers, when they're dealing with the USDA, easily provide the data that's needed to the government, and can they easily talk to someone when they need to in a video digital first way? So I think when we're looking at those customer experience stories, we want to bring those best of breed applications into that world. And so I mean that's sort of, I think, where we're starting, and that's some of the vision behind the what the Biden White House is trying to do with that executive order.
Matt?
Yeah, Tom, again, thank you for having us on the show. You think of the customer experience, most people look out there and they really determine how people figure out technology they're going to put in there. But what happens is the customer experience has to come from the customer. So those end government users. And when the government over the past year and a half plus had to send everybody home, everybody's work experience became different. Everybody, how they managed people, how they did their work, how they collaborated. So as this customer, it's great to see this customer experience, and now the agencies are putting each individual into those areas to handle the customer experience. So now you're starting to see that they have to start looking at the platforms. What is that experience? We'll talk a little bit about recruitment, retainment, how they do business, how they get the message out. Town halls. With new administration coming in, how do they use different types of events to get the communication out to all of their individuals? Stephen kind of mentioned webinars. We watch CDC, communicate out for the pandemic as well as the vaccine to 20,000 people a day on this type of platform. So getting critical information, as Stephen mentioned, out quickly to people, but also giving them the experience that if I'm going to work a hybrid environment, I want to have the same experience that if I'm in the office, I want to have the same experience that I'm working from home, and having those technologies that tie it back together.
All right, so maybe explore a little bit the idea of the fact that the government pivoted to being able to operate in and of itself very quickly and adopted video types of platforms for collaboration, and those platforms themselves evolved very quickly too early on, so that they could meet government security standards and reliability standards. They all seem to get better looking, better sound as the time went on. But now it seems almost as if the government needs a way to turn that level of experience outward so that people coming to the government can feel the same way, that everything they need is there. Plus, there is that human touch too, isn't there? When there's the site component, as opposed to calling a call center and you don't know what you're going to be on the other end.
Yep. It's interesting, Tom, you mentioned, it's that experience that people have, that human connection. So you look at how the government, typically you'd watch 5 to 7 years as certain transformation happen. We saw transformation happen during the pandemic in 5 to 7 weeks, sending thousands of people home. And what now you're starting to see with this customer experience is people for Zoom, we were catapulted into this, and we were very fortunate to make a big difference in what was going on in the government. But then we also start to look at how people are changing the way they do business. It's policies, it's new things out there. How do you manage people? So if you look at the technologies out there, people want something, and this is where you're starting to see more and more of these customer experiences. I was just on a call with somebody around a workforce transformation, and now they're soliciting the feedback from the end users and having the end users have their what they want to do and what's going to make them the most productive. And sometimes you're going to see some of these systems working together, but then as you go through this whole transformation, you're helping these customers, evolve and transform what they're doing. You have to get the technologies in place first. So if you're going to have trainings, do you have meetings on video platform to do that? Do you have a voice platform that if I had the same number, I could be in the office or on my computer at home and be able to receive phone calls? And then you start to look at the structured amount of money people can save by transforming and getting into these more consolidated platforms makes a big difference. And the other part is, you talk about the platforms, really start to look at accessibility. And so you look at that accessibility component, it's another really modernization driver. And it really comes down to two things. One is compliance, and two is the opportunity to those who need accessibility capabilities, having those platforms out there that those individuals who may not be able to come into the office for some reason, but can have the same customer experience that they do while they're in the office.
And so you mentioned the set of you mentioned the set of technologies that will be needed. And one you mentioned was in the telephony area. And it surprises me how many federal desk phones don't ring over to federally issued cell phones yet. That's a pretty basic functionality. A lot of them haven't seemed to use yet. But what are some of the other technological pieces that need to be in place to, again, help the government stay agile and also to offer better CX?
Well, it's also secure, real quick, is security. So if you look at the phone, like we talked about phone, you talked about cell phones, you're seeing a lot of agencies that had people buy phones using their own devices. And a lot of times that becomes the security personal information going out there. It's how do you also give that experience? We talked about phone, but it can go to their cell phone. But in that cell phone, it has an application, and that application has their work phone on it. So all of a sudden you can either forward it, or you can have that platform. Like if we have it, I have a phone, somebody calls me, I can pick up the phone and they're calling my work number versus calling my cell phone number. So you're starting to also protect the personal information of individuals as you start to look at this platform. So it's not just say, hey, a great platform. Is there security behind it? Is it, FedRAMP authorized? And all those pieces kind of come together.
Looking at the art of the possible, one of the things, Matt, as he's led us and led our federal practice and our public sector practice broadly at Zoom, is to look forward and say, we've learned a lot, obviously, over the course of the pandemic, but how can we use those lessons to change the way things are done? Obviously, bringing the coordination of the desktop phone and the cell phone, but what are other ways? And one of the powerful ways that Zoom has been used as a platform is to bring experts from around different regions where it would be difficult to bring them all into the same room at the same time and bring that shared value. I was, honored that recently we were used as a part of an agency, a social service campaign dealing with elder abuse, and bringing in different experts on the medical field, on the social services side, on the law enforcement side, to really help loved ones on a sort of, it was a monthly series to help loved ones get information on how to spot these crimes and how to address and what to look for. And we see the same with human trafficking and other areas where we're bringing in experts from around you could be around the country or even around the world, when we're bringing them into the same virtual room and people are able to benefit. So these are, this would be very difficult. Ordinarily, we would have had to fly everyone in and bring everyone into the same place. And it can be a real challenge. And especially when we think about, Matt mentioned accessibility, we're trying to reach people, when focus on those people who are maybe the most challenged in being there in person. And we want to make sure that people in these critical moments of their lives are able to participate and obtain the benefits in a quick and easy fashion. And bringing video into those situations is technology forward. It has nothing to do with what we've been going through for the last 2 years, but it's capitalizing on those learnings and those lessons that we've had. So I think bringing that human centricity of that video experience and bringing that in, I think that's going to only do wonders in that experience that the customer of government is going to be obtaining.
It's almost as if it changes the equation of call on the phone, send in a letter, even get online at a website versus in person. And maybe this makes in person less important, where you have the video component of online, and then you have that type of interaction that people want without all of the expense and hassle and time consumption and scheduling issues of in person. Fair to say?
Yes, and it's interesting, Tom. You start to look at how people become more productive, and the people's calendars are back to back. But I was having a discussion with a government official and what it was like for them, because they're all in different parts of the building, having to go to different meetings. If I had to drive from my house, 40 minutes to DC, go park, go through security, have someone meet me there for a half-hour meeting, that person's 10 minutes behind individuals coming 10 minutes behind from a meeting. And by the time you go through the introductions, you have 10, 15 minutes and they got to leave 5 minutes early to go to the next meeting. Here, you're starting to look at how government officials, this really comes down to this customer experience. How can they best put their schedule together? So for instance, if I'm a government official and I have to meet with vendors or contractors, I can now set my meetings up in that customer experience to say, okay, I have a half hour for this group. I have all my team on the call. I can pull them all in from one area. I can focus for that 30 minutes or 25 minutes, 100% on what potentially could help that agency save money, be more efficient, productivity, and really enhancing the customer experience. So you're starting to see that people are looking at their calendars and say, look, Thursday mornings, I'm going to set from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. or 10 a.m. for meetings across there, and they schedule those out. There's also ones that people start to look at the customer experience where people set up longer meetings. Now you start to break things down to 15-minute meetings, 30-minute meetings. So one are quick decisions, and people can become more productive. But at the end of the day, we're all, human connection, as Stephen mentioned, whether it's on video or in person, people in this hybrid environment, we're going to have both. But what happens, you have to have the tools in place. And this is that we talked about, this transformational platforms that allow you to, off of that same platform, can I have video? Can I have voice? Can I have a webinar meeting so I can communicate out? Can I have events? Can I have all kinds of other types of potential virtual whiteboarding, and be able to collaborate that way that you can pull people?
And Stephen, do you get the sense that this has also brought on the idea of telemedicine and televideo doctor and medical visits in agencies like Veterans Affairs, and there's so many of them across government? That's been a long time in kind of development. Now it seems like it could make a big, giant leap forward all of a sudden.
Absolutely. And, as Matt said, it's going to be hybrid. There's going to be in person and there's going to be remote. And the important thing that we want to stress is, those moments that matter. Obviously, telemedicine, you're not going to have surgery, done remotely. But, or if I told you in your personal life, again, to bring the nexus back to the consumer, if I could say, if you have playoff tickets to see your favorite team, would you want to be, at the right there in the middle of the action, or would you rather be in your living room? You might say, well, that's such a moment that I would want to be there and be there in person. But in between, maybe there's go downtown to the stadium every time could be a burden, or and we're seeing the same thing. So with telemedicine or with any other scenario, those critical in-person moments, we sort of absolutely welcome those times. But instead of having only those moments and then blank in between, to be able to have a video engagement in between for checkups to see, and what we're able to do with cameras now, and bringing technology in to really bring much more diagnostic elements into that. It really helps those in between times, so that we don't have peaks and valleys where someone goes in, has a procedure or has some kind of intervention, and then in between there's just sort of nothing. And so all of that effort to bring that experience to really be best of breed, so that people always feel like they are where they should be, or they're informed and they have the information to make decisions. And it's not coming from a robot, it's coming from a human being that they can see a smile on an empathetic face. And I think that is really powerful. When we talk about medicine, we certainly, those factors, that bedside manner is critical, and to be able to bring that forward into people's lives is transformative.
And Matt, earlier you mentioned the processes of recruitment and retaining people for the government itself. And it seems like the same idea can apply here too. This high touch human interaction is enabled by these platforms such as Zoom for that really crucial part of bringing on people is in the hiring process, really has a lot of effect on how they'll feel about their government career, perhaps for a long, long time.
Exactly. And if you think about this, Tom, this whole hybrid environment, the hiring process and the recruitment and retainment is, if you don't have that capability for people and you don't put those transformational technologies in place to give them that customer experience, people are not going to come work in the government. So, or any company. So now you start to look at how they're putting these policies in place. So the hiring process, I can do multiple interviews and not have to go anywhere. From a recruiting, we watched this happen where in the Air Force, back even far back as April 2020, we recognized a military comm and what they did with recruitment, and being able to use our technology to go out and keep the recruitment numbers up, and they're recognized by their general officer. So if you look at that piece of it, the retainment component really comes in there. So when one of the agencies moved a couple thousand people home in a day, very specialized group, and they had to, most of them were in the office, and most of them were required to be in the DC metro area. Well, what they found was working from home, putting the right technologies in place, allowed them to be super productive. So now they're looking at this, wow, we have this specialized organization, these specialized skills we have. I can start to recruit from North Carolina, Texas, California, Colorado, and finding those people who have this true skill set but don't want to move to the DC area. So this recruitment component comes in, and then retaining the people, because now you start to look at what are the future of government employees going to look like. Some are going to come in, some are not. But then also those ones who want that hybrid, opportunity, that also is going to open up, I'll say, be very transformational for the government as they're recruiting the next group of individuals, the students coming out of a college, or bringing people in from industry to support that.
And especially for the knowledge workers that the government brings in, the location of them becomes less important, and agencies can focus more on who's the best talent, as opposed to whether do we have to move them from here to there, for example.
Exactly. And if you even look at the weather, where the government was shut down because of ice and snow. Well, if people know weather's coming and something's happening, they can be required to bring your computers home because you're working from home. So a snow day is not going to be a snow day anymore. It has the opportunity to keep people up. And plus two, it helps with their workload. For instance, if you don't go in the office or you don't have access to your computers, you could lose a week's worth of work and have to get caught up. Here, you have the opportunity to be productive from home in that same thing, creating the experience for people to be productive and be able to do the things that they want to do in an environment that makes them, I'll call, happy. The biggest thing, the number one thing I hear across around the customer experience is simplicity. It's easy, it works. And we've been very fortunate that people had used our technology in their personal lives. And then going into a government and supporting the government side, that same experience they had with the security we have around our FedEx platform really allowed people to adopt and quickly transform. Sometimes they have these technologies that are really difficult to get people to use, find a way to make them productive. Here, simplicity becomes a thing. It's easy, it works.
And Stephen,
absolutely. We talk about OPM, and I really want to echo what Matt's saying. They're talking about flexibility, and Matt mentioned that snow day. So the one, 1 or 2 days where maybe the federal government shut down because of a snow event. And then there's those following days. I had the ability to speak with a disabled government contractor recently, a real hero. And, he has to go in with his wheelchair. He says those days after the snow emergency where there's salt on the roads, to go over that with a wheelchair, the salt gets everywhere on his clothes and everything. It's a real thing. So that when we're bringing that accessibility, we're really thinking about, hey, how do actually people's lives work? It's not just, okay, well, we've cleared the roads now, but now we're thinking about, can we allow that disabled person a few days so that the streets can be, the rains can rinse off some of that salt, and that person can have a much better experience. When we talk about retaining and recruiting and motivating people, those little differences can make a huge impact. And as Matt said, we're not suffering a productivity loss at all, because we're able to continue having these face-to-face interactions on the FedRAMP platform, and really being able to serve the mission in these important ways.
And just a final question in the moment we have left: any commercial industry practices that government could learn from that you've seen here working across government and industry, as they've also had to adopt, the commercial side has also had to adapt to this pandemic era, which seems to have left some permanent residue?
Yeah, no, and absolutely. And we've seen, as we mentioned, obviously not every consumer experience that we've had is going to be the best one. But when we see those ones that are particularly strong, we want to bring those into government and really see how we can improve. We've seen how banks, for example, obviously respecting privacy, are able to bring in customer information into that video call, so that when you're transferred from person to person, you don't have to restart, your story, for example. And that's been part of the call center experience on the phone side, but to be able to bring that in on a video side, so that people on their cell phone or wherever they find themselves, they're not losing that information, and they're able to get empathetic face-to-face experience. We're seeing that on the manufacturing side, where production line workers, when they have a question, they're able to bring an expert in for an immediate adjudication, sometimes even with these goggles into a Zoom meeting, to say, hey, is this part being built in the right way? Government can benefit from that. We did mention triage, battlefield medicine. That certainly is an area of customer experience that we could markedly improve. But any interaction with government where someone needs to be brought in as an expert, without having to say, okay, well, there'll be a delay, or we'll have weeks will go by, we're just able to bring people in and triage and move things forward. And we know, really buoyed by the vision that Matt's bringing into the federal practice to bring these experiences forward in his interactions, obviously at the senior executive level. So that's absolutely our focus going forward.
Matt, final word.
Yeah, I think, you need to look at academia. We're starting to see the trainings, how we're educating students. We just did a workforce transformation thing to share with people what the capabilities are out there. So as we're, from an industry side, it's incumbent on us to share what some of those best practices look like. And as we start to look at, virtual whiteboards, things that we're doing in the education space, really can attribute to how are we going to do trainings going forward in the federal government? How do we take some of these best practices and share it out there? And the piece here I think is the most important is, as government agencies are looking at how they're doing this customer experience, they really need to not just buy the technology and figure it out, is really solicit the users, understand what the capabilities, what their needs are, and then start to put that, and this is where you're starting to see industry coming together, where 2 or 3 people organizations may get together and go to a customer and say, this is your work, your telework, your transformational setup. Here's how all of us integrate together. And that's the key thing. When you talked about healthcare before, it was around that.
All right, lots to think about. Matt Mandrock is the head of U.S. Public Sector at Zoom. Stephen Ellis is the Government Solutions Lead at Zoom. I'm Tom Temin. You're listening to Federal News Network. For more on this interview, please visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search Zoom.